There will come a morning, ordinary in every way, when you wake up and realize you haven't thought about her in days, not because you forced it, not because you numbed yourself, but because your mind is now occupied by something greater, your mission, your growth, your future. And in that moment you'll feel it, not relief, not bitterness, but peace, deep, unshakable peace, because you've finally crossed the invisible line where her absence no longer defines your presence. You're not over her because time passed. You're over her because you became someone she wouldn't even recognize, stronger, clearer, unreachable. That's the quiet victory most men never live to see. They stay trapped in the loop, chasing, hoping, wondering, hurting, never realizing that the real war wasn't for her heart, but for their own self-respect. And you fought it in silence, no fanfare, no declarations, just daily choices that added up to transformation, choosing the gym over the phone, choosing work over waiting, choosing stillness over desperation. Each decision, small on its own, became a brick in the foundation of a new life, one she doesn't live in, one she doesn't control, one she can't disrupt, and that's what makes her feel it most. Not your anger, not your distance, but your indifference. Not the cold kind, not the spiteful kind, but the calm, unshakable kind that comes from a man who has found something more important than her attention: purpose. Because when you stop orbiting someone else's world, you begin building your own. And a man with a mission doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. His energy is moving forward, pulling everything with it. His confidence, his discipline, his aura. And people notice, even her, even from afar. She might hear about you through someone else. He's doing really well. He's focused. He's changed. And those words won't just register in her mind. They'll echo. Because she knew the man who loved her deeply. But she never saw the man who would rise because of her absence. And now, knowing that you're not broken, not begging, not looking back, that you're thriving, cuts deeper than any rejection ever could. Not because you want her to hurt, but because truth has a way of cutting through illusion. And the truth is, you didn't fall apart, you leveled up. But here's what she can't understand, because she wasn't willing to live it. This isn't about her at all. It never was. It was about you reclaiming your power, about learning that love should never cost your self-worth, that loyalty should never be one-sided, that presence should be a gift, not a burden. And now you give that gift only to those who honor it. You no longer pour into empty cups. You no longer explain your value to those who can't see it. You simply are. And in that being, you become untouchable. There will be moments, sure, when the old feelings flicker, when a song plays, when a memory surfaces, when the silence feels too heavy. But you won't break, because now you know the difference between loneliness and growth. Loneliness says, I need someone. Growth says, I need to become someone. And you've chosen growth. Every morning, you choose it again, in the way you speak, in the way you move, in the way you no longer shrink yourself to fit into someone else's world. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it, not because you're sending a message, but because silence amplifies truth. And the truth is loud now. You were never the one who needed her. She was the one who needed what you gave. Consistency, loyalty, peace. And now that it's gone, she feels the weight of what she dismissed. But you're not waiting for her to realize it. You're already living in the reality she left behind. Because the highest form of power isn't revenge, it's evolution. It's becoming so focused on your own light that you no longer care who sees it. And when she finally looks, really looks, she won't see a man trying to win her back. She'll see a man who already won. And that changes everything. Not for her, for you. Because now, no matter what happens, you've already won the only battle that ever mattered, the one for your soul. There's a quiet moment, no warning, no fanfare, when you realize you no longer need closure. Not from her, not from anyone, because closure isn't something given, it's something claimed. And you've claimed it, not in words, but in action. In every morning you chose discipline over despair. In every night you spent building instead of breaking. In every text you didn't send. In every thought of her you let pass like a cloud across a clear sky. Seen, acknowledged, then released. That's when it happens, the shift from longing to liberation, from waiting to winning, from hoping she'll see you, to knowing you've already seen yourself. And that self? He's stronger than you ever believed possible. Not because he's hardened, not because he's closed off, but because he's clear. He knows now that love should never feel like sacrifice, that respect shouldn't have to be earned through suffering, that your presence is not a tool to be used, but a gift to be honored. And when someone fails to honor it, the strongest move isn't begging. It's walking away without drama, without explanation, without looking back. Because the man who values himself doesn't need to prove his worth. He simply lives it. This is where most men fail, not in the silence, but in the aftermath. They think ignoring her is the end. But it's only the beginning. The real work starts now, the daily choice to stay focused, to stay grounded, to keep building even when no one's watching, to lift when no one applauds, to speak less but mean more, to love deeply but only when it's safe, to trust but only when it's earned. That's the standard now, not because you're bitter, but because you've learned the cost of settling. And you'll never pay that price again. She may come back, she may not. And that uncertainty, that's where your strength is tested, not in the silence, but in the stillness after, when the mind whispers, what if she's changed? What if this time is different? That's when you must stand firm, not out of pride, not out of fear, but out of loyalty to yourself. Because the man you've become doesn't gamble his peace on what ifs. He doesn't risk his stability for a second chance with someone who once treated his love like an option. He knows now that second chances only work when both people have changed. And while she may regret losing you, you've already moved beyond needing her to regret anything. Because your power isn't in her reaction. It's in your consistency, in the way you show up for yourself every single day, in the way you no longer let her absence define your worth, in the way you've turned pain into purpose, silence into strength, loss into leverage. That's real transformation. Not a comeback, a breakthrough. And here's the deepest truth. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it, not because you're punishing her, but because you've become real in a world full of pretense. You stop playing roles. You stop performing. You stop shrinking. And that authenticity, that's what lingers. Not your words, not your texts, but the energy of a man who finally stopped chasing and started becoming. You don't need her to return to know you've won. You don't need her to regret to feel at peace. You've already reclaimed what mattered most. Your dignity, your focus, your fire. And that fire now burns for one purpose, your future. Not a future with her, not a future defined by her choices, but a future built by your own hands. One decision at a time, one day at a time, one silent, powerful moment at a time. So let her feel it. Let her sit in the quiet you left behind. Let her realize in her own time what she had. But more importantly, let yourself feel it. The quiet pride of a man who didn't break, who didn't beg, who didn't lose himself in the pain, who stood in the fire and walked through it with his head high. Because you're not the man she let go. You're the man she couldn't keep. And that's not a loss. That's a legacy. A quiet, unshakable proof that when you choose yourself, truly, deeply, without apology, everything changes. Not because of her, not in spite of her, but because of you. And that's the final truth. You didn't need her to come back. You needed to come back to yourself. And now that you have, nothing and no one can ever take that from you again. There's a moment, still unannounced, when you realize you no longer fear her moving on, not because you don't care, but because your peace no longer depends on her choices. You can hear she's seeing someone new, and instead of rage or regret, there's only calm, a quiet understanding. She made her decision long before the silence began. And you? You made yours. Hers was about comfort. Yours was about growth. And that's why you're not standing still while she moves forward. You're already ahead, not in competition, in evolution, because real strength isn't measured by who stays or leaves. It's measured by who you become when no one's watching, when the world is quiet, when the phone stays dark, when the old habits whisper to come back, to check, to wonder, to hope, and you don't. Not because you're suppressing emotion, but because you've upgraded your standards. You no longer trade peace for the illusion of connection. You no longer confuse attention with love. You know now that real love doesn't leave you questioning your worth. It confirms it. And until that kind of love returns, if it ever does, you're not waiting, you're preparing. And preparation isn't just working out, building your career, or cleaning your space. It's deeper. It's emotional discipline. It's learning to sit with discomfort without reacting. It's choosing long-term fulfillment over short-term relief. It's understanding that every time you resist the urge to reach out, you're not just ignoring her, you're honoring the man you're becoming. Every silent morning, every focused hour, every boundary held without apology is a brick in the foundation of a life that can't be shaken by someone else's absence. She may think silence means you don't care, but she's wrong. You care deeply, not about winning her back, but about never losing yourself again. That's the real wound most men never heal. Not the loss of her, but the loss of them. The version of themselves that got buried under neediness, under begging, under trying to prove they were enough. And you've dug yourself out. Not with anger, not with force, but with daily quiet courage. The courage to be alone, to be misunderstood, to be silent while the world demands noise. And in that silence, something rare grows, self-trust. The unshakable belief that you will always have your own back, that you won't abandon yourself for love, that you won't shrink to fit into someone else's life, that you'll walk away before you stay in a place where you're not valued. That's not pride, that's integrity. And integrity is magnetic, not to the weak, not to the manipulative, but to those who recognize strength when they see it. So let her feel the weight of your absence. Let her feel the space where your loyalty once lived. Let her realize in her quietest moments that she didn't just lose a partner. She lost a man who loved deeply, who stayed long after he should have left, who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. And now that he's gone, not angry, not broken, but peaceful and moving forward, she feels what she couldn't feel when he was there, the depth of what she dismissed. But you're not living in her realization, you're living in your resurrection. Every day is another step further from the man who needed her, and closer to the man who doesn't need anyone to validate his worth. And that man, he doesn't chase, he doesn't beg, he doesn't explain, he simply is. Strong, grounded, free. And in that freedom, he becomes someone even he didn't believe in. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it, not because you want her to hurt, but because truth doesn't die. It waits. And in the silence, it rises. It shows her what she ignored. It shows you what you reclaimed. And in the end, that's all that matters. Not her return, not her regret, not her words, but your peace, your power, your presence, fully, finally, unshakably your own. Because the greatest victory isn't winning her back. It's realizing you never lost yourself. And that changes everything. There's a moment, soft, almost imperceptible, when you stop measuring time by her absence and start measuring it by your growth. Not by days since the last message, not by how long it's been since you spoke, but by how much stronger you've become, how much clearer your purpose is, how much deeper your confidence runs. That shift, that's the turning point. Because now you're not just surviving the silence, you're thriving in it. You've stopped seeing it as emptiness and started seeing it as space. Space to breathe, space to build, space to become the man you were meant to be, not the version shaped by her needs, her moods, her approval. And in that space, something powerful takes root, self-reliance. Not the cold, isolated kind, but the deep, unshakable knowing that you are enough, exactly as you are, that you don't need her attention to feel alive, that your value isn't tied to her presence, that your peace isn't something she gives or takes away. It's yours, claimed, protected, lived. And when you operate from that truth, everything changes. You stop reacting to her world. You start leading your own. She may try to test the silence, a message from an old number, a story that feels too intentional, a mutual friend dropping a hint. And in that moment, the old you might have lit up, hope flaring, heart racing, thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe she's ready. But the new you see it for what it is. Not a second chance, but a final test. A test of your discipline, of your clarity, of your loyalty to yourself. And you pass not by responding, not by reacting, but by doing nothing. By staying rooted, by remembering that peace is not found in her return, but in your refusal to be pulled back into chaos. Because that's the deepest lesson silence teaches. You don't heal by going back. You heal by moving forward. And every time you choose forward, over nostalgia, over comfort, over the illusion of familiarity, you reinforce a new identity, the man who doesn't need closure, the man who doesn't seek validation, the man who knows that real love doesn't make you beg for scraps, it gives you a seat at the table. And if she can't see that, then she never deserved to sit beside you. This isn't about being cold, it's about being clear, about understanding that kindness without boundaries is self-betrayal, that love without respect is just emotional labor, that presence without appreciation is invisible work, and you've done enough of that. You've given enough of yourself to someone who treated your loyalty like a given, not a gift. And now, you give that gift only to those who honor it, to your mission, to your growth, to your future, and that future, it's bright. Not because she might come back, but because you're building something real, something that can't be shaken by someone else's choices. You wake up earlier, you train harder, you speak with more conviction, you set boundaries without apology. You say no to what drains you and yes to what builds you. And in that consistency, you become someone even you didn't believe in. Not perfect, not invincible, but real, grounded, unstoppable. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it. Not because you're trying to make her regret, but because truth has weight. And the truth is this: you were never the one who needed her. She was the one who needed what you offered: stability, loyalty, depth, peace. And now that it's gone, she feels the void. But you're not in the void. You're beyond it. You're building on solid ground you laid yourself. And one day, whether she returns or not, you'll look back and realize the silence didn't take anything from you. It gave you everything. It gave you back to yourself. It taught you that the strongest thing a man can do is choose himself, quietly, consistently, without apology. And when you live that way, nothing, not her absence, not her regret, not her return, can ever define you again, because you've already defined yourself. And that definition? It's written not in words, but in action, in silence, in strength, in the unshakable truth that you are enough, and that changes everything. There's a quiet power in becoming someone who no longer needs to prove anything, not to her, not to the world, not even to yourself, because the day you stop needing validation is the day you become dangerous, not in a threatening way, but in the way a calm ocean is dangerous to a fragile boat, deep, unshakable, full of unseen strength. You don't announce it. You don't post about it. You simply live it. And that's what makes it real. That's what makes it lasting. You've already done the hardest part. You stayed silent when every fiber in your body wanted to reach out. You walked away when every memory screamed to come back. You chose your future over a ghost of the past. And in that choice, you didn't just break a cycle. You ended it. Not with drama, not with anger, but with stillness so strong it couldn't be ignored. Even if she doesn't say it, even if she never admits it, she feels it. The shift, the distance. The man who once moved with her rhythm now moves to his own beat. And that beat, it's steady, it's purposeful, it's unstoppable. That's what makes silence so powerful. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. It simply exists. And in its existence, it forces reflection. She doesn't miss the texts. She misses the consistency. She doesn't miss the calls. She misses the safety of knowing someone had her back no matter what. She doesn't miss you as a person. She misses what you represented: loyalty without condition, love without demand, presence without price. And now that it's gone, she feels the weight of what she took for granted. Not because you wanted her to, but because truth always surfaces when the noise stops. But here's what most men never realize. Her realization isn't your reward. Your reward is deeper. It's the mornings you wake up and don't check your phone first. It's the nights you spend reading, training, planning, building a life that doesn't revolve around someone else's attention. It's the way you carry yourself now, shoulders back, eyes forward, no longer shrinking to fit into a space that never honored your full size. That's the real victory. Not her regret, not her return, but your resurrection. Because you weren't just ignored, you were asleep. Asleep to your worth, asleep to your power, asleep to the fact that love should feel like peace, not anxiety. And the silence woke you up. It stripped away the illusions. It showed you that you were giving your best self to someone who only wanted pieces of you, the easy ones, the convenient ones, the ones that didn't require effort. And now you give your full self only to those who are ready for it. And if she's not ready, that's not your loss. It's her lesson. You don't need her to come back to know you've won. You don't need her to apologize to feel at peace. You've already reclaimed something far more valuable than her attention: your integrity, your dignity, your soul. And no matter what happens from this point forward, that can never be taken from you again. Because you've proven to yourself that you will choose you every single time, even when it hurts, even when it's hard, even when the world tells you to compromise. And that's the final truth. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it, not because you're punishing her, but because silence is the loudest form of truth. It doesn't lie. It doesn't manipulate. It simply reveals. And what it reveals is this: you were never the one who needed her. She was the one who needed what you gave. And now that it's gone, she feels the absence like a missing limb. But you're not missing anything. You're whole. You're complete. You're free. So keep going. Not for her, not for revenge, or not for closure, but for the man you're becoming, The one who doesn't need to look back to know he's moving forward. The one who loves deeply, but only when it's safe. The one who gives fully, but only to those who give back. The one who stands in his truth, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Because in the end, it was never about her feeling you. It was about you feeling yourself again. And now that you do, nothing and no one can ever break you the same way twice. There's a moment, unseen, unspoken, when you realize you no longer need to prove you've changed. Not to her, not to the past, not even to the version of yourself that once begged for love like it was oxygen. Because the proof isn't in words, it's in the way you move through the world now, calm, deliberate, untethered. You don't chase, you don't explain, you don't perform. You simply exist in your truth. And that existence speaks louder than any argument ever could. That's the power of silent transformation. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It radiates. It shows up in the way you handle rejection without crumbling, in the way you stay focused when distractions call your name, in the way you choose growth over comfort every single day. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not trying to make her jealous. You're not trying to win back what was lost. You're building something new, something solid, something lasting, something that can't be shaken by someone else's choices. And in that building, you become someone even you didn't believe in. She may hear about you, maybe through a friend, maybe through silence so loud it speaks for itself. And when she does, she won't hear about a man broken by her absence. She'll hear about a man who rose because of it. And that cuts deeper than any rejection, because it means you didn't fall apart, you leveled up. And she didn't cause your growth, she merely created the space for it. That's the ultimate truth she can't escape. You didn't need her to become great. You needed her to walk away so you could remember who you were all along. But this isn't about her feeling small. It's about you becoming large, not in ego, but in presence, in the quiet confidence of a man who knows his worth doesn't fluctuate with someone else's attention. You've stopped measuring your value by her reactions. You've stopped tying your peace to her moods. You've stopped shrinking yourself to fit into a space that never honored your full size. And in that refusal to compromise, you've become magnetic. Not because you're trying to attract her, but because you've become the kind of man who naturally draws respect, admiration, and quiet awe. And here's what she can't understand, because she wasn't willing to live it. This isn't punishment. This is self-preservation. This is evolution. This is the moment you chose yourself not out of pride, but out of love. Love for the man you were, who gave everything. Love for the man you are, who's healing. Love for the man you're becoming, who will never again trade his peace for the illusion of connection. And that kind of love, that's unbreakable. You don't need her to come back to know you've won. You don't need her to regret to feel complete. You've already reclaimed what mattered most, your dignity, your focus, your fire, and that fire now burns for one purpose, your future. Not a future defined by her presence or absence, but by your own choices, your own discipline, your own unshakable belief that you are enough. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it, not because you're trying to make her hurt, but because silence amplifies truth. And the truth is this: you were never the problem. You were the solution she wasn't ready for. You loved too deeply. You stayed too long. You gave too much. And instead of honoring that, she took it for granted. But now, in your silence, she sees what she dismissed. Not because you showed her, but because you stopped showing. And absence has a way of revealing what presence often hides. So let her feel it. Let her sit in the quiet you left behind. Let her realize in her own time that she didn't lose just a partner. She lost a man who loved with his whole soul. A man who stood by her when others would have left. A man who forgave when he should have walked. And now that he's gone, not broken, not bitter, but peaceful and moving forward, she feels the weight of what she failed to cherish. But you're not waiting for her to see it. You're already living in the reality she left behind. Because the highest form of power isn't revenge, it's becoming. It's evolving into someone so focused on his mission that he no longer cares who's watching. And when she finally looks, really looks, she won't see a man trying to win her back. She'll see a man who already won. And that changes everything, not for her, for you. Because now, no matter what happens, you've already won the only battle that ever mattered, the one for your soul. And that victory, that's permanent, that's unshakable, that's yours forever. There's a quiet moment, no warning, no signal, when you realize you no longer fear her moving on. Not because you don't care, but because your peace isn't tied to her choices anymore. You can hear she's with someone new, and instead of the old sting, there's only calm. a deep, unshakable stillness. Because you've finally understood the truth, her moving on doesn't erase what you were. It doesn't diminish your loyalty, your love, your presence when it mattered most. And more importantly, it doesn't define your worth. You made your choice long ago, not in words, but in action. While she was pulling away, you were showing up. While she was creating distance, you were holding space. While she was taking your love for granted, you were giving it freely anyway. And now? You're not punished for that love, you're rewarded for it. Because it proved who you are, not weak, not desperate, strong, loyal, real. And that kind of character doesn't disappear. It builds, it compounds. It becomes the foundation of a life that no breakup, no silence, no loss can destroy. She may think she's moved on. But moving on isn't just about replacing someone. It's about growing beyond what you were. And if she hasn't done that, if she's just repeating old patterns with a new face, then she hasn't moved on at all. She's just running. But you're not running. You're standing still in the fire, letting it burn away everything that wasn't real, every lie you believed about needing her, every false idea that love means suffering. Every moment you gave your power away just to keep someone close, the fire takes it all. And from the ashes you rise, not angrier, not colder, but clearer. And clarity is power, not the loud kind. Not the kind that demands attention, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything, the kind that simply knows that love should feel like peace, not anxiety, knows that respect shouldn't have to be earned through endless effort, knows that your presence is a gift, not a burden. And if someone can't see that, they don't deserve to receive it. So when she tests the silence, another indirect message, another mutual friend comment, another attempt to see if you're still there, you don't react, not because you're indifferent, but because you're disciplined. Because you've learned that every time you respond to noise, you sacrifice peace. And peace is no longer negotiable. It's non-negotiable. It's your standard. And you protect it like your life depends on it, because your freedom does. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it. Not because you want her to hurt, but because truth has weight. And the truth is this: you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you started caring about yourself, about your future, about the man you were meant to become, and in that care you found strength. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that stays, the kind that builds, the kind that doesn't break under pressure, but grows stronger because of it. You don't need her to come back to know you've won. You don't need her to regret to feel complete. You've already reclaimed what mattered most, your self-respect, your focus, your fire. And that fire now burns for one purpose, your mission, not a mission to win her back. A mission to become the man who no longer needs to, a man who leads with integrity, who loves deeply but only when it's safe, who gives fully but only to those who give back, who stands in his truth not because it's easy but because it's right. And one day, whether she returns or not, you'll look back and realize the silence didn't take anything from you. It gave you everything. It gave you back to yourself. It taught you that the strongest thing a man can do is choose himself, quietly, consistently, without apology. And when you live that way, nothing, not her absence, not her regret, not her return, can ever define you again, because you've already defined yourself. And that definition, it's written not in words, but in action, in silence, in strength, in the unshakable truth that you are enough, and that changes everything. There's a moment, so quiet it almost slips by, when you realize you no longer compare your life to what it was when she was in it. Not because you've forgotten, but because your present has become too powerful to be measured by the past. You wake up now with a different weight in your chest, not the old ache of longing, but the steady pulse of purpose. Your days aren't spent wondering if she's thinking of you. They're spent building something real, something lasting, something that can't be undone by a text, a look, or a moment of weakness. And in that shift, you cross a line you never knew existed. You stop healing from her and start living beyond her. That's the final stage of transformation, not closure, not revenge, not even forgiveness. It's irrelevance. Not of her as a person, but of her power over your peace. She no longer holds the keys to your mood, your confidence, your self-worth. You've taken them back, not in a dramatic act, but through 1,000 quiet choices. Choosing the gym over the phone, choosing silence over begging, choosing your future over a ghost of the past. And with each choice, you've rebuilt yourself, not to be loved by her, but to be respected by yourself. And that self-respect, that's the force that changes everything. Because when you finally stop begging for love and start embodying worth, the entire dynamic shifts. You don't need her to miss you. You don't need her to regret. You don't need her to see you to know you've changed, because you feel it in your posture, in your voice, in the way you no longer flinch at loneliness, but use it as fuel. You've stopped seeing solitude as emptiness and started seeing it as space. Space to grow, to reflect, to become the man who doesn't need validation to stand tall. She may try to re-enter, not with words, but with energy. A story that lingers too long. A mutual connection that accidentally brings you up. A silence that feels intentional, like she's waiting for you to break, but you don't. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. You've learned that every time you react, you surrender power. Every time you respond, you reopen a door you work too hard to close. And you're not going back. Not for a second chance, not for closure, not even for answers, because you've already answered the only question that mattered. Who am I when I choose myself? And the answer is this: you are strong. You are disciplined. You are free. Not because she left, but because you stayed with yourself. You stayed through the pain. You stayed through the doubt. You stayed through the nights when the silence felt like failure. And in that staying, you discovered the deepest truth. Real strength isn't in never falling. It's in rising every time you do. And you've risen, not once, but daily, in the gym, in your work, in your mindset, in the way you now set boundaries without apology, speak with conviction, and move through the world like a man who knows his value. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it, not because you're trying to make her hurt, but because absence reveals truth. And the truth is loud now. You were never the one who needed her. She was the one who needed what you gave. Loyalty without condition, love without demand, presence without price. And now that it's gone, she feels the void. But you? You're not in the void. You're beyond it. You're building on solid ground. Ground you laid yourself. One day, whether she returns or not, you'll look back and realize this was never about her coming back. It was about you coming home, to yourself. And now that you're here, nothing can pull you away again. Because you've learned the most powerful lesson of all. The strongest thing you can ever do is nothing at all. And in that nothing, you found everything. There's a quiet moment, no fanfare, no warning, when you realize you no longer wonder what she's doing. Not because you forced it, not because you've numbed yourself, but because your mind is now occupied by something greater, your mission, your growth, your future. And in that shift, something profound happens. You stop living in the space between what was and what could be, and you finally arrive in what is. Not loss, not longing, but presence, your own. This is the final stage of mastery, not forgetting her, but outgrowing the need to think about her. It's not hatred, it's not bitterness, it's elevation. You've stopped measuring your progress by her reactions and started measuring it by your consistency. How early you wake up, how hard you work, how calm you stay when old emotions knock on the door. You don't ignore them, you acknowledge them. You keep walking because you've learned that feelings are not commands, they're visitors. And you decide who gets to stay. And in this new space, you discover a truth most men never lived to see. Peace isn't found in having everything you want. It's found in wanting what you already have, yourself, your time, your energy, your focus. And when you value those above all else, no one can take anything from you. Not her silence, not her return, not her regret. You've built a life so strong, so rooted in self-respect, that her presence or absence no longer shifts your foundation. That's real power. Not the kind that dominates, the kind that endures. She may try to re-enter, not with a message, but with energy, a mutual friend's comment, a story that feels too intentional, a silence that hums with unspoken tension. And in that moment, the old you might have lit up, hope flaring, heart racing, thinking, maybe this is my chance. But the new you see it for what it is, not a door opening, but a test, a final exam. And you pass not by responding, not by reacting, but by staying silent, by staying grounded. By remembering that peace is not found in her return, but in your refusal to be pulled back into chaos. Because you've learned the deepest lesson, love should not feel like begging. It should feel like peace. And peace doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself again and again and again. Every time you don't text, every time you don't check her profile, every time you choose the gym, the work, the mission over the memory. That's not coldness, that's clarity, that's self-love in its purest form. And that love, it radiates. Not because you're trying to attract her, but because you've become someone who naturally draws respect. You don't need to prove your worth. You live it in the way you speak, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you no longer shrink to fit into a space that never honored your full size. You stand tall, not to impress, not to punish, but because you finally understand you were never the problem. You were the standard, and she didn't lose you. She failed to meet what you offered. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it, not because you want her to hurt, but because silence amplifies truth. And the truth is this: you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you started caring about your future, your dignity, your soul. And in that care, you became untouchable, not because you're closed off, but because you're aligned with your purpose, with your values, with the man you were meant to be. One day, whether she returns or not, you'll look back and realize this was never about her. It was about you coming back to yourself. And now that you're here, fully, finally, unshakably, you know one thing with absolute certainty: you will never again trade your peace for the illusion of love. Because you've already won, not her back, but yourself. And that changes everything. There comes a moment, soft, unforced, when you realize you no longer need to know what she's doing. Not out of indifference, but because your attention has been fully reclaimed. It no longer leaks into the past. It no longer searches for signs. It stays rooted in the present, focused on the life you're building with your own two hands. And that shift, that's the final liberation. Not when she walks away, but when you stop looking back, when your energy stops orbiting her world and finally settles into your own. This is where most men get stuck. They think the goal is to make her feel something, but that's still giving her power. The real goal is deeper. It's to become so grounded in your own worth that her emotions, whether regret, longing, or even return, no longer dictate your peace. You don't want her to miss you. You want to be the kind of man who can't be missed, not because he's gone, but because he's become so solid, so aligned, so unshakable that absence itself becomes a statement. And that statement is simple: I am not optional. Not in love, not in life, not in my own story. You were never meant to beg for a seat at the table. You were meant to build your own. And now you are, not with anger, not with revenge, but with daily discipline, with quiet focus, with the kind of consistency that doesn't need applause to continue. You wake up, you train, you work, you grow, you set boundaries, you speak less but mean more. And in that stillness, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to attract her, but because you've become someone who naturally commands respect. She may try to test the silence. A message that says, I hope you're doing well. A mutual friend who mentions her name too casually. A social media story that feels like a mirror held up to your absence. And in that moment, the old you might have seen hope, but the new you sees only a reflection of your own strength. Because every time you don't respond, you reinforce a new identity. The man who doesn't need closure, the man who doesn't seek validation, the man who knows that peace is more valuable than contact. And peace isn't passive, it's powerful. It's the courage to let someone draw their own conclusions, even if they're wrong, even if she calls you cold, even if she says you've changed. Let her, because you have changed, not into someone worse, not into someone heartless, but into someone who finally understands love should not feel like suffering. It should feel like safety. And safety doesn't come from her return. It comes from knowing you will always choose yourself. The more you ignore her, the more she feels it, not because you're punishing her, but because silence reveals truth. And the truth is this: you didn't disappear. You became real. Real in a world full of pretense. Real in a relationship where she took your loyalty for granted. And now that you're no longer performing, no longer proving, no longer shrinking, you've become unforgettable. Not because you fought to stay, but because you chose to leave with dignity. You don't need her to come back to know you've won. You don't need her to regret to feel complete. You've already reclaimed what mattered most: your time, your energy, your soul. And that soul, it's no longer fractured, it's whole. It's focused. It's moving forward with a clarity that no distraction can blur. Because you've learned the deepest truth: the strongest thing a man can do is nothing at all. Not out of weakness, not out of apathy, but out of strength, out of self-respect, out of the quiet certainty that his worth is not up for debate. And one day, whether she returns or not, you'll look back and realize this was never about her feeling you. It was about you feeling yourself again. And now that you do, now that you're fully present in your own life, you know one thing with absolute certainty: you will never again trade your peace for the illusion of love, because you've already found it. Not in her, not in her return, but in you. And that changes everything.